The obsidian arches of the High Synod of Valkyria hummed with a low, resonant frequency that vibrated through the marrow of every being present, a subsonic reminder of the authority held within these ancient walls. Here, above the swirling violet storms of the gas giant Othries, the masters of the Ethel Guardian hegemony gathered not in celebration, but in a state of agitated deliberation that threatened to fracture the delicate crystalline silence of the chamber. The light in the hall was dim, filtered through the transsteel dome that looked out into the void, casting long, spectral shadows that danced across the faces of the Council of Exarchs. They were a tall, slender species, their skin the color of burnished slate, etched with bioluminescent veins that pulsed in rhythm with their emotional states. Right now, the chamber was awash in the erratic, staccato flashing of indigo and crimson, signaling a mixture of aggressive posturing and suppressed anxiety. The hegemony had stood for 10,000 cycles, an empire built on the bones of lesser civilizations, a sprawling tapestry of conquered star systems and assimilated cultures that stretched across the arm of the galaxy like a jeweled gauntlet. They were the architects of order, the bringers of the great silence to those who screamed in the chaos of primitive existence. Yet today, the silence was broken, and the order was threatened by a variable that refused to fit into their meticulously calculated algorithms of conquest. High Exarch Valen stood at the center of the dais, his hands resting on the holographic interface that projected the tactical map of the outer rims. He was a towering figure, his bioluminescence burning with a steady, furious red, his eyes, black pools devoid of sclera, fixed on the small, unassuming cluster of stars near the galactic fringe. To his left stood Consul Alara, the voice of diplomatic caution, her own lights a soft, wavering blue indicating deep contemplation and a fear she dared not vocalize. To his right was War Master Kriv, a hulking mass of scarred chitin and synthetic augments, vibrating with the eagerness of a predator that had caught the scent of blood. The subject of their discord was a species that had only recently stumbled onto the galactic stage, a species that called itself humanity. They were soft, fleshy, lacking in natural armor or psionic capability, and their technology appeared at first glance to be a patchwork of outdated fission and crude subspace drives. They had settled on a few dozen worlds in the buffer zone, a region the hegemony considered its rightful backyard. Yet when the initial warnings were sent, demanding submission and tribute, the humans had not responded with fire, nor with surrender. They had responded with a message that the hegemony translators had struggled to parse, a message that was less a diplomatic retort and more a confusing, paradoxical plea. "They mock us with their silence," Valen intoned, his voice a grinding tectonic shift that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. 3 cycles have passed since the ultimatum, 3 cycles since we demanded they dismantle their orbital defenses and submit to the Ethel Guardian protection. And what do we receive? A transmission of binary noise, a refusal to engage. They ignore the fleet massing on their border as if we were nothing more than cosmic dust. It is an insult that demands blood. He gestured violently at the hologram, where red icons representing the hegemony's armada swarmed like angry insects around the pale blue markers of human territory. The scale of the hegemony's force was staggering, an unending river of dreadnoughts and cruisers, enough firepower to glass a dozen worlds in a standard rotation. Against this, the human presence seemed laughable, a scattering of orbital habitats, a few trade lanes, and ships that looked more like industrial haulers than vessels of war. The humans had no grand fleets patrolling their void. They had no fortresses of war. They seemed to exist in a state of naive vulnerability that offended the martial sensibilities of the Exarchs. Consul Alara stepped forward, the friction of her robes whispering in the quiet gap left by Valen's declaration. She viewed the tactical display not with the hunger of a conqueror, but with the pattern recognition of a scholar who sees a discrepancy in the data. "Is it mockery, High Exarch, or is it something else?" she asked, her voice melodic but firm. "I have reviewed the linguistic analysis of their initial broadcasts. The translation matrix struggles because their concepts do not align with the standard prey-predator dynamic we encounter in emerging species. They did not ask for mercy. They did not threaten retaliation. The message, as best as we can decipher, was a warning, but not a warning of their strength, a warning of consequence. They said, 'Do not wake the stillness.' They said, 'We are holding the door.' It is cryptic. It lacks the bluster of a warrior. Ultra, yet it lacks the desperation of a dying one. I advise we pause. We send a probe. We understand why they do not flee." War Master Kriv let out a guttural sound, a wet clicking laugh that shivered through his augments. To pause is to show weakness, Alara. The galaxy watches. If the hegemony hesitates before a species of soft-skinned primitives who barely mastered faster-than-light travel, our vassals will smell blood in the water. We do not decipher riddles, we crush resistance. Their silence is the paralysis of fear. They see the shadow of our armada and they are frozen. They hope that if they stay very still, the predator will pass them by. It is a biological instinct, nothing more. We should burn their border worlds to ash. Then when they are screaming, we will see if their stillness remains. Kriv slammed a fist onto the console, causing the hologram to flicker. My captains are restless. The weapon capacitors are charged. The logic is simple. They occupy space that belongs to the Ethelgard. They refuse to bend. Therefore, they must break. There is no third option in the natural order. Valen nodded, the red light of his veins intensifying. Kriv speaks the truth of the void. We are the gardeners of this galaxy, and weeds must be plucked before they choke the order we have cultivated. These humans, they are anomalies. They build without expanding. They explore without conquering. It is unnatural. It suggests a lack of drive, a stagnation that is the antithesis of the Ethelgardian spirit. We gave them a chance to serve. Now we give them the honor of destruction. He turned back to the viewing pane, looking out at the stars that he believed belonged to him by divine right. Issue the order, Warmaster. The Grand Fleet is to advance into the Sol sector. Target their primary orbital infrastructure. Do not target the habitable zones yet. We need slaves for the mines of Othries, but break their ships. Shatter their silence. Let them know that the hegemony does not warn twice. Alara watched the commands flow across the screen, a cascade of authorization codes that would unleash hell upon the unsuspecting human frontier. She felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her primary stomach. It was illogical, this fear. The statistics were overwhelmingly in their favor. The humans were outclassed in every metric: tonnage, energy output, shielding, speed. A simulation run by the strategic AI predicted a total human collapse within 14 standard hours. Yet the anomaly in the data persisted. The human ships, those few that had been scanned, gave off strange readings. Their energy signatures were low, almost background noise, but their mass displacement was immense, far heavier than their size should allow. And there was the matter of the dark zones, regions of space within human territory where hegemony sensors simply went blind, returning null data. Valen dismissed it as interference or sensor malfunction. Alara feared it was deliberate. She feared that the humans were not hiding because they were afraid, but because they were hiding something else. The narrative shifted as the perspective moved from the sterile, high-gravity coldness of the Synod to the bridge of the Ethel's Wrath, the flagship of the invasion fleet. Admiral Zalor stood upon the command deck, surrounded by the hum of high-tier warfare. The ship was a masterpiece of destructive engineering, a sleek, predatory spear of neutronium and coherent light emitters, miles long, surrounded by a swarm of escort frigates that moved in perfect, synchronized formation. Ahead of them lay the boundary of human space, marked by a sparse line of navigation buoys. Zalor felt the thrill of the hunt. He had studied the human profiles. They were physically unimposing, their history a chaotic mess of internal squabbles. They had only united recently, and even then their unity seemed fragile. They were not warriors, they were engineers, poets, farmers. They were soft. Time to intercept, Zalor barked, his voice amplified by the bridge comms. We will cross the boundary in 30 microcycles, the sensor officer reported, their fingers flying across the haptic interface. No active targeting detected from the human side, no shield flares. Their vessels are holding station. Admiral, they are not in attack formation. They are in a blockade line, but facing away from us. Zalor paused, his brow furrowing. Facing away, explain. The human ships, Admiral, their engines are directed towards us. Their prows are facing into their own territory. It is irrational, unless they are attempting to flee, but their engines are cold, they are drifting. Perhaps they have already surrendered, Zalor sneered, though the anomaly irked him. Bring us to weapons range, target the lead vessel. It appears to be a command carrier, boxy, ugly thing. Hail them one last time. Tell them the Ethelgardian hegemony demands their immediate deactivation. The communications officer open. Ed the channel. The frequency hissed with static, then cleared to reveal the face of a human. It was an older male, his face lined with the passage of time, hair the color of steel wool. He wore a uniform that was frustratingly simple. No medals, no gold braid, just a dark gray tunic with a single insignia on the collar. He looked tired, not afraid, just infinitely weary. This was Admiral Kalen Vance. He looked at the camera, not with the eyes of a man facing his executioner, but with the look of a teacher dealing with a particularly unruly child. This is the United Terran Coalition vessel Heisenberg. The human spoke, his voice transmitted across the void, translated by the hegemony computers into the harsh, guttural tongue of the Ethelguard. You are entering a quarantined zone. We have received your threats. We have logged your demands. We are telling you, for the final time, turn back. You do not understand the nature of the space you are entering. This is not a request. This is a safety protocol. Zalor laughed, a sharp, barking sound. Safety protocol? You speak of safety while staring down the barrel of a supernova cannon? You are arrogant, human, or you are mad. We are the Ethelguard. We do not turn back. Surrender your vessel or be vaporized. The human admiral sighed. It was a long, slow exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. We aren't fighting you, Vance said softly. We're trying to save you. If you fire those weapons, you will disturb the equilibrium. The energy discharge, it attracts attention. Please, just go home. Fire, Zalor ordered, cutting the transmission. He was done with the riddles. The Ethel's wrath shuddered as its main spinal lance discharged. A beam of coherent plasma, hot enough to strip the atmosphere from a planet, lashed out across the darkness, traversing the distance between the fleets in a heartbeat. It struck the Heisenberg dead center. Zalor waited for the explosion, the satisfying blossom of fire and debris that would mark the start of the conquest. But there was no explosion. The beam hit the human ship and vanished. It didn't deflect off shields. It didn't melt armor. It simply ceased to exist upon contact with the hull. The energy reading on the sensor board spiked to infinity and then dropped to absolute zero. The space around the human ship rippled, like water disturbed by a stone, and the massive plasma lance was absorbed, swallowed whole by a darkness that seemed to coat the human vessel. Report, Zalor shouted, gripping the rail of the command podium. Did we miss malfunction? No malfunction, Admiral, the tactical officer's voice trembled. Target impacted, energy transfer confirmed, but damage is zero. Admiral, the human ship, its mass just increased. It absorbed the energy. It didn't shield against it, it ate it. Before Zalor could process this, the sensor board lit up like a supernova. Admiral, multiple contacts. The human fleet, they are moving, they are turning. On the view screen, the blocky, utilitarian human ships began to rotate. They spun on their axes with a grace that belied their clumsy appearance. And as they turned to face the hegemony fleet, the Ethelguardian sensors finally pierced the electronic camouflage that had been hiding the true nature of the human vessels. These were not haulers. They were not cruisers. They were mobile singularities. Each ship was built around a containment unit of such density that it warped the starlight around it. Hail them, Zalor whispered, his confidence fracturing. Hail them now. The screen flickered back to life. Admiral Vance was still there. He hadn't moved. He was looking down at a datapad, tapping a few commands. He looked up, and this time his expression was harder. We absorbed your warning shot, Vance said, his tone clinical. Our capacitors are now at 104% capacity. We really didn't need the extra charge, but thank you. Now listen closely. You are using Type 4 plasma weaponry. It operates on a frequency of 400 terahertz. That frequency is problematic. It resonates with the barrier. What barrier? Zalor demanded, trying to regain his composure. What are you talking about? Fight us like warriors. We gave up war a long time ago, Vance said. Not because we were bad at it, but because we found something that made war irrelevant and terrifying. The human leaned forward. You think you are the apex predators here. You think this is a territorial dispute. It's not. You are children playing with matches in a library filled with gunpowder. We are the librarians, and we are telling you to put down the match. We outnumber you 10-1, Zalor roared. All ships engage, fire at will, overwhelm their absorption grid. The hegemony fleet erupted. Thousands of beams, missiles, and kinetic slugs poured into the void, a rain of fire that would have ended civilizations. It was a display of martial might that had cowed 100 worlds. Against the humans, it was a light. The human ships didn't fire back. They didn't maneuver to evade. They simply stood there. The energy washed over them, and again the ripples in space appeared. The missiles simply stopped, their kinetic energy drained instantly, leaving them drifting harmlessly. The lasers bent around the hulls, trapped in localized gravity wells that the humans manipulated with terrifying precision. Then the humans acted. They did not fire cannons. They did not launch fighters. Instead, the Heisenberg emitted a pulse. It was not a weapon, but a signal, a code. System intrusion, the operations officer screamed. They are in the mainframe. They are in everything. The lights on the Ethel's wrath turned from the aggressive combat red to a soft, clinical white. The engines whined down. The weapon's capacitors purged their charge, venting harmless plasma into space. Across the entire hegemony fleet, the silence fell. Engines died. Reactors went into standby. The Great Armada, the pride of the High Exarch, was drifting, powered down by a remote command that bypassed every firewall, every encryption, every failsafe. "They turned us off," Zaller whispered, staring at his dead console. "They just turned us off." Back in the High Synod, the holographic map turned gray. The icons of the fleet were still there, but they were listed as inactive. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the arrogance of the Exarchs. Valen stared at the display, his mouth open, his bioluminescence fading to a dull, terrified gray. "Impossible," Valen breathed. "Treachery, sabotage." "Technology," Alara corrected, her voice trembling. "Technology so far beyond us that it appears as magic. They did not destroy the fleet, High Exarch. They neutralized it without firing a shot. They have total operational control of our systems. If they wished, they could detonate every reactor in the fleet. They have spared us." The central screen of the Synod, usually reserved for decrees from the Emperor, flickered. Admiral Vance's face appeared, looming over the council. He looked even more tired now. "High Exarch," Vance said, addressing Valen directly. "Your fleet is currently in a forced shutdown cycle. We have locked your weapons systems. We have not harmed your crew. We will return control of your navigation systems shortly so you can retreat. But before you go, you need to see why we are here. You need to understand what you almost did." "You dare insult the hegemony?" Valen blustered, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. "You used trickery to—" "Silence," Vance said. The word was not shouted, but it carried an acoustic weight that silenced the room. "No more speeches, no more posturing. Look." View on the screen shifted. It showed the space behind the human fleet, the area the humans had been blocking with their bodies. At first, it looked like normal, star-filled void. But as the camera zoomed in, filtering through the spectrums, the Exarchs saw it. A tear, a jagged, bleeding wound in the fabric of reality, roughly the size of a planetary system. It wasn't black. It was a non-color, a void that hurt the eyes to look at. Around the edges of the tear, reality was fraying, dissolving into static. And from within that tear, something was pushing. Massive, writhing shapes, made of shadow and hunger, were pressing against a shimmering, translucent barrier. A barrier generated by a lattice of ancient, non-human megastructures that the humans had been maintaining. "The Void Rift," Vance narrated, his voice solemn. "It's been here for 1,000,000 years, the result of a war between the precursors. They broke space-time. The things on the other side, they don't want territory, they want entropy. They eat physics. They consume the laws of nature. If they get through, the chain reaction will unravel the bonds between atoms across this entire sector and then the galaxy." The image zoomed in on the barrier. It was glowing faintly, but there were cracks. "Your plasma fire," Vance continued. "The resonance frequency of your weapons, it weakens the containment field. Every time you fired a shot, you were ringing the dinner bell. You were chipping away at the only wall standing between existence and total negation. We weren't blocking you to keep you out of our territory. We were blocking you to stop you from breaking the dam." The silence in the Synod was absolute. The pettiness of their conquest, the desire for resources, the pride of the Empire, it all evaporated in the face of the cosmic horror displayed on the screen. They had been banging on the door of a cage, angry that the guards wouldn't let them in, unaware that the beast inside was listening. We did not know," Alara whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "Ignorance is not a defense when the stakes are survival," Vance said. "We have spent the last 3 centuries reinforcing this barrier. We dedicated our entire economy, our entire science, to being the custodians of this rift. That is why we don't buoy. LD warships. We build shield generators. We build gravity anchors. We don't fight wars because we are too busy fighting the end of the world." Suddenly, a red alert klaxon blared, not from the hegemony consoles, but from the audio feed coming from the human bridge. On the screen, the humans were moving with frantic, disciplined energy. The view of the rift shifted. The barrier was buckling. The energy from the hegemony's initial barrage had caused a harmonic destabilization. A crack, vast and terrifying, was spreading across the light construct. "Resonance spike," a voice shouted in the background of the human bridge. "The containment is fracturing in Sector 4. The barrage weakened the local lattice. Something is coming through." Vance looked back at the camera, his eyes blazing. "You broke it," he said, and for the first time there was anger in his voice. "You broke the seal. We can't hold it alone. The Heisenberg is an anchor ship, but we need raw power to reseal the breach. We need energy output, massive amounts of it." He looked at Valen. The look was a challenge. "Your fleet. It's useless for fighting us, but it has reactors. It has directed energy weapons. If you want to live, if you want your empire to exist tomorrow, you will link your fire control to my tactical net. You will pour every ounce of energy you have into the coordinates I send you. You will become the welder to our steel." Valen hesitated. To submit to the humans, to take orders from the species he had deemed primitive. It was a humiliation beyond measure, but he looked at the screen. He saw the tendril of non-existence leaking through the crack, dissolving an asteroid into nothingness. He saw the end of all things. "Do it," Valen rasped. Then he shouted, his voice regaining its command. "Do it! Admiral Zalor, obey the human, link the fleet, give them everything." On the frontier, the scene transformed from a standoff to a desperate, unified struggle. The hegemony fleet, powered back up by the human override, maneuvered into a new formation, mixing with the blocky human vessels. "Coordinates received," Zalor shouted on his bridge, sweat slicking his brow. "Targeting the breach. All ships set emitters to continuous wave, match frequency to human carrier wave." "Initiate," Vance ordered. The human ships generated a massive, intricate geometric field, a web of golden light that spanned the opening of the rift. It was a scaffold, a template for reality. "Pour it in," Vance commanded. The hegemony fleet opened fire. But this time, they didn't fire to destroy. They fired to create. Thousands of beams of plasma, lasers, and particle streams converged on the human web. The raw energy was caught by the human technology, channeled, refined, and transmuted into binding energy. The golden web flared brighter than a star, searing the sensors of both fleets. The rift screamed, a sound that was not sound, but a psychic pressure that made every crew member on every ship fall to their knees, clutching their heads. The entities from the other side lashed out, shadow claws grasping at the closing door. One of the hegemony frigates drifted too close. The shadow touched it, and the ship simply unraveled, turning into dust, then atoms, then nothing. "Hold the line," Vance's voice cut through the psychic scream. "Increase output to 120%. Burn out the cores if you have to." Zalor slammed his hand on the override. "Safety limits disengaged. All power to the forward batteries." The Ethel's wrath shuddered violently as its reactor pushed beyond its critical limit. Metal groaned, conduits burst, sparking fires on the bridge. But the beam held. The combined might of the hegemony's war machine, designed for slaughter, was now the fuel for salvation. The human ships acted as the lens, focusing the raw fury of the aliens into a surgical suture. Slowly, agonizingly, the tier began to close. The golden light stitched the fabric of space back together. The shadows were pushed back, howling in frustration. The void shrank from a system-spanning wound to a moon-sized hole, then a city, then a pinpoint. With a final, blinding flash that overloaded the visual cortex of every being watching, the rift sealed. The silence returned. The void was calm. The stars shone steadily, no longer distorted by the bleeding edge of reality. The human ships powered down their glowing webs, their hulls scorched and venting heat. The hegemony fleet was adrift, many ships dark, their reactors fused or exhausted. On the bridge of the Heisenberg, Admiral Vance slumped into his chair, wiping a trail of blood from his nose. He took a deep breath, savoring the recycled air. He opened the channel to the Synod and the hegemony fleet. "Containment stabilized," he said, his voice raspy. "The lattice is holding. We'll need a decade to repair the structural integrity, but we're still here." High Exarch Valen sat in his throne, the fight drained out of him. He looked at the human admiral really low. Oaked at him for the first time. He saw the immense burden these people carried. They had hidden their strength not to deceive, but because their strength was a tool of burden, not conquest. They were the atlases of the galaxy, holding up the sky while the Ethelgard played at war beneath it. "You," Valen started, his voice humbled. "You have been guarding this, alone, for how long?" "Since we found it," Vance replied. "Since we left our cradle and realized the universe was fragile, we decided that someone had to be the adults. Someone had to do the job nobody else wanted." Consul Alara stepped forward, her blue lights glowing with a mixture of shame and reverence. "We came to conquer you. We called you weak." "We are used to being underestimated," Vance said with a faint, tired smile. "It makes the diplomacy easier, usually." "You possess power that could subjugate the galaxy," Alara said. "With that technology, you could have wiped us out in seconds. You could rule the hegemony." "We don't want to rule," Vance said, and the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Ruling is messy, it's inefficient, and it distracts from the work. We just want to keep the lights on. We just want the universe to last a little longer. The implications settled over the council. The humans were not a threat to be managed. They were a power to be reckoned with, a power that operated on a moral axis completely orthogonal to the hegemony's understanding. They were the custodians. What happens now? Valen asked. Do you demand tribute, reparations, territory? Vance shook his head. We require resources to repair the barrier, rare isotopes, heavy metals. Your fleet has plenty. We also need you to stop shooting in this sector. Establish a demilitarized zone, 10 light-years in every direction from the rift. That is acceptable, Valen said. It was a small price to pay for existence. And one more thing, Vance added, his eyes hardening slightly. You have a vast empire. You have resources, ships, manpower. We are few. The barrier is old. We are tired. He paused, looking at the alien leaders. We warned you to stop fighting. Now we are inviting you to start working. We don't need subjects. We need partners. The rift is just one of many fracture points. The galaxy is leaking, Exarch. We've been plugging the holes with our fingers. We could use some help. The offer hung in the air. It was not a treaty of surrender. It was an elevation. The humans were offering the Ethelgard a purpose greater than the endless, cyclic grinding of conquest. They were offering them a place on the wall. Valen looked at his hands, then at the map of his empire. It seemed small now, petty. He looked at Alara, then at Kriv. Even the War Master seemed subdued, awed by the scale of the enemy they had just helped defeat. The Ethelgardian hegemony, Valen announced, his voice regaining its strength, but with a new timbre, one of duty rather than pride, accepts the terms. We will provide the materials. We will enforce the zone. He bowed his head, a gesture that had not been seen from a high exarch in 4,000 years. Teach us, human, teach us how to hold the door. Admiral Vance nodded, a slow, respectful gesture. All right, first lesson, turn off the guns. Second lesson, open the books. Welcome to the Galactic maintenance crew. It's a thankless job, the hours are terrible, and the hazards are infinite. But the view. He gestured to the view screen, where the stars burned bright and stable against the infinite dark, safe for one more day. The view is worth it. The channel closed. In the High Synod, the silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of tension. It was the silence of a new beginning. The universe had shifted. The predators had met the protectors, and in the face of the encroaching dark, they had chosen not to fight but to stand together. The war for territory was over. The war for survival had just begun, and for the first time, the humans weren't fighting it alone. The months that followed the Great Rift incident, as it came to be known in the Ethelgardian histories, were a period of unprecedented societal upheaval. The revelation that the galaxy was not a playground for conquest, but a fragile construct held together by the silent vigil of a lesser species, shattered the philosophical foundations of the hegemony. The transition was not smooth. There were riots on the martial worlds, suicides among the high caste who could not reconcile their perceived superiority with the reality of their helplessness. But there was also a blossoming of new thought. The engineers, the scientists, the scholars of the hegemony, those who had always been subservient to the warriors, found themselves elevated. They were the ones who could speak the language of the humans. They were the ones who could understand the esoteric mathematics of the containment fields. Humanity, for its part, opened its borders, but only selectively. They did not allow mass tourism. They did not allow colonization. They allowed exchange. Delegations of Ethelgardian physicists were invited to the Heisenberg and other arc ships of the Terran coalition. They walked the halls of these vessels, marveling at the utilitarian austerity. There were no statues of conquerors, no tapestries of battle. The walls were lined with schematics, with ecological preservation data, with art that depicted the beauty of nebulae and the intricate dance of subatomic particles. The humans were a species of warrior monks, but their religion was thermodynamics, and their monastery was the void. Consul Alara became the permanent ambassador to the Terran coalition. She spent cycles aboard the Heisenberg, learning the history of the humans. She learned of their own violent past, their near-extinction events, and how they had stumbled upon the ruins of the precursors on Mars. She learned that the humans had almost destroyed themselves with the very technology they now used to save the galaxy. It was a sobering mirror to her own people. The humans were not naturally peaceful. They were peaceful by necessity. They had looked into the abyss and realized that if they didn't hold hands, they would all fall in. One evening, during the ship's night cycle, Alara stood with Admiral Vance on the observation deck. They were watching the repair crews, mixed teams of human drones and Ethel Guardian heavy lifters, welding a new stabilization spire onto the reality anchor. "My people call you the Silent Kings now," Alara said softly. "It is a title of reverence." Vance chuckled, sipping a cup of bitter synthetic coffee. "Kings imply subjects. We don't want subjects, Alara. We've told you that." "I know, but old habits die hard. We need a hierarchy. It comforts us." She paused, her bioluminescence pulsating with a soft violet hue, a color of introspection. "Admiral, you said there were other fracture points. How many?" Vance looked out at the stars, his face growing somber. 7 known, 3 stable, 2 critical, and one that we haven't been able to reach yet because it's deep in the territory of the Cygnus swarm. Alara shuddered. The Cygnus swarm were a species of insectoid hive minds, aggressive and uncommunicative. Even the hegemony avoided them. "They will not listen to reason," Alara said. "They will attack you." "We know," Vance said. "That's why we haven't gone. We can't hold the line and fight a war at the same time. We don't have the numbers." Alara looked at him and then at the Ethel Guardian ships in the distance. The Ethel's Wrath was there, refitted. Its plasma cannons had been replaced with focused resonance emitters. Its armor had been reinforced with human alloy formulas. It was no longer a weapon of war, it was a tool of preservation. But it still had teeth. "You don't have the numbers," Alara repeated, a realization dawning on her. "But we do. The swarm respects strength. They respect aggression if we go, if the hegemony clears the path." Vance turned to her, his expression unreadable. "It would be a war, a real one. We can't ask you to do that. We are peacekeepers." "You are peacekeepers," Alara corrected, standing straighter, her lights shifting to a determined indigo. "We are the Ethel Guard. We are warriors. We have spent 10,000 years learning how to destroy. Perhaps it is time we used that talent for something other than vanity. You hold the door, Admiral. Let us clear the hallway." Vance looked at her for a long time. Then slowly he extended his hand. It was a human gesture, one Alara had learned. She extended her long, slender hand and grasped his. "We leave for Cygnus in 2 cycles," Vance said. "The Heisenberg will provide the shielding. You provide the spear." "It will be done," Alara vowed. The alliance that was forged that day changed the trajectory of the galaxy. It was not a federation of trade or politics. It was a pact of existence. The humans, with their ancient wisdom and reality-bending technology, became the shield. The Ethel Guard, with their martial prowess and fearless aggression, became the sword. Together, they moved against the darkness. When the Cygnus swarm swarmed the fleet, it was the Ethel Guardian dreadnoughts that broke their lines, their commanders laughing with the joy of a righteous battle, knowing that for the first time their violence had meaning. And behind them, protected by the wall of Ethel Guardian steel, the human science ships moved in, silent and efficient, to stitch the wounds of the universe closed. It was the beginning of a new age, an age where peace was not the absence of conflict, but the result of unified purpose. The galaxy was still a dangerous place. The void still hungered, but the warnings had been heard. The fighting between children had stopped and the work of the adults had begun. And deep in the archives of the High Synod, carved into the central crystal of the council chamber, was a new maxim translated. From the human tongue. Si vis pacem parabellum, sed si vis vitam serva murum. If you want peace, prepare for war, but if you want life, guard the wall.